Okay, so in my second video here, I'm just going to show you where these comments come from and where the sentences used to generate all these random um, comments come from and how it all works. This is all done in the background. The formulas and so on are hidden from you. You'll never be able to edit them or accidentally mess anything up. The main thing you can edit though is the comments bank. So this is on a separate Excel sheet within this workbook. If you go into the comment bank, you'll see it's split up into 6 sort of tables, and one table is per each sentence used. So for example, we've got sentence 1, which is the introduction. Sentence 2, comment about effort and consistency. Sentence 3 is to do with the strength, so choosing a strength to mention. Sentence 4 is a target to mention. Sentence 5 is ATL skill, and sentence 6 is the conclusion. Now, how this works is it's always in this order: sentence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And for the first one, it is randomly chosen based on final level, which means we've got 5 comments for each level. So for level 7 student, we've got 5 introduction comments. For level 6 student, we've got another separate 5 comments. Now, as long as you write these differently, or different comment for each one, you will end up with quite a high chance that you won't get the same report twice. You will find with this system, the way I've laid it out, you'll have something like 6.5 million different combinations of reports possible. For the most part, even if your student has, or you have a list of, say these students have the exact same scores across everything, you would have to have at least 25 of them before you will start to see reports repeated. So there's actually 25 different possible reports. So how this works is it chooses one of these comments, then it chooses one of these, and it chooses one of these, depending on certain things. So sentence 1 is a random choice of these 5. Sentence 2 is based on effort and consistency. So effort is your effort input here. This is something that you will manually have to enter. Consistency is worked out in the background, and this looks at the grades here. So for example, if this student actually had straight threes, then the consistency is very high for this student. It might not be a very high final grade, but at least they've been consistent, which I think is always worth mentioning. So if you look at what is actually written for sentence 2, her results across the criteria assessments have been very consistent this term, and she has put in a good amount of effort into her work for the mini speaker project unit. So this student, it's picked up that there's a high consistency here. If we look at this student, let's make it, yeah, I guess that's quite inconsistent as it is. So Brian's found some difficulties. So his lack of effort has had a negative effect on the consistency of his results. So he's got, I've only put him at an effort level 1, but say it's a 2. Though he has put a good level of effort into his work, his results have not been consistent across all criteria. So that consistency comment kind of comes from looking at these. The system does this automatically. It'll look at these numbers, figure out if they are consistent or not, and then assign an appropriate comment. If you do not want to use that and you just want to talk about effort only, you can just remove any mention of consistency from these comments that you could type in or edit, and then it will just pick a random one out of these 3 for a high level of effort, out of these 3 as a medium level of effort, and out of these 3 as a low level of effort. How it currently works is 3-3 means top effort, top consistency. 3-2 means top effort, medium consistency, top effort, low consistency, medium effort, high consistency, medium effort, medium consistency, and you get the idea. So there's what, 9 different options in this case, and you can see the way I've written the comments. It's kind of, it makes sense for the scores that the student either is given or generated based on those results. Sentence 3 and 4 are quite similar in how they work. There's 12 options. They are grouped into criteria. So let's have a look at Brian. So he's got his best criteria is a 6, and his worst one is a 1. So B is his best criteria, A is his lowest criteria. So B is his best one, so it'll probably be one of these. So one of these comments is chosen. How we choose the comment depends on his level as well. So Brian has got a level 3 final grade, which isn't that high. It's actually probably below average or quite low from most teachers and I guess parents' point of view. So that's fair enough. So when we talk about the different comments we can use for Brian, his best would probably come from here or from here. The reason I've split this up into a level specific thing as well, I've actually simplified the level. So if your student is getting, I think it's a 6 or above final level, they'll be given this. If they're somewhere in the middle, they'll be given that. And if they're getting below a 3, they'll be given this. The reason I've done that is because sometimes, especially for the target levels, the target criteria, sort of to improve, it doesn't make sense if your student, for example, has straight 8s. Let's make Brian get straight 8s across all criteria. It will still choose, like it's chosen at random, criterion D, evaluating, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't always make sense that, why are you telling him to improve criteria D when he's got the top grade? Remember, you can adjust which one you get given on this red column here, but to make it a bit more accurate, I've put in, for example, if a student is getting the top level or a very high level, but is still sort of lacking in detail in one particular area, which I can mention, I could say one of these top level targets. So the only thing I really change is I say that not to improve his final grade, but to maintain his final grade. So if he's already at the top, surely the main thing you should do is to try and maintain it. Okay, and maybe next time you know that it's going to be more difficult in criteria B, for example, so a student can maintain his high grade in the future by taking a bit more time to improve his drawing and so on. Now you'll notice as well, these have all been written for design, MYP design. So the targets and the strengths that are linked to the criteria, so in design, criterion B is developing ideas, criterion C is creating the solution. I've written those in to make sense for design. If you teach a different subject, it's quite easy to just go through and change these. You could even use the same kind of layout and language I've used, but just change how, if he's doing well in criterion A for maths, for example, you could say, well, what is special about his work in criterion A? What kind of skills has he been showing to get that as his strength? Likewise with target, this is probably more useful from a report writing point of view, because parents usually want to know how the student can improve their work. So if they need to improve criterion B in whatever your subject area is, how could they typically do that? There's probably a few skills that they could practice or work on to try and improve that area next time. Sentence 5 is ATL skills. Now, I don't think I mentioned this before, but you can actually remove that sentence altogether. So if you don't want to mention ATL skills in your reports, you can just remove the grade. And that actually deletes the sentence from this. If you do want to use it, you can just score them on exceeding, meeting, approaching, and so on. And depending on which grade you put in here, it will choose one of these 4 options. And again, depending on the ATL skill you've you've been assessing, creative thinking, for example, especially for the below expectations or approaching expectations, you might want to explain how they could improve that in the future. Okay, I've done it quite generally there. It's not the most important part of the report, I don't think, but it's worth mentioning if you feel they've met expectations and so on. Finally, the final sentence, sentence 6, is much the same as the first sentence in that, depending on the final level the student's got, it chooses one of 5 random sentences to use, or conclusion to use. Now, as I've been showing you these, you may have noticed that these aren't written in sort of normal English. They're almost coded to an extent. I'll show you exactly why that is. Now, these sentences are actually live, so if I change one of these, it will change it in this report. I will show you a quick example of how to change them in a minute, but first you need to understand why it is we write them in this format. So the best way for me to show you that is to show you this quick example. Now, this isn't part of the sheet, this is purely an example comment used to sort of show people how to edit their own comment banks or their own, or how to write them from scratch so that the system can understand. So the original example comment here says, Adam has been working very well in his recent mini speaker project. He is a hard-working student and his efforts have allowed him to achieve a high grade. To improve his grades, he should blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. It's just a really general example there. It's not a very good example either, to be honest, but I just wanted to keep it short. So the edited version of this would look like this. Now, you would have to actually either type in these changes, or you could edit them on your existing comment bank and just copy and paste them in. It's up to you how you do it. The main changes here, you'll notice, firstly, any mention of the student's name should be changed to student ! You'll also notice that this has been written for a male student. That is important because of the difference in the English language of his and him for a male student. If it was a female student, these words would just be her and her. So to be able to change the gender of a student in our list over here, so if I change Brian to a girl, for example, it will change all of those gender-specific words to ones that you would use for a girl. So it's just important to remember to write this for a male student. Any comments you use in this have to be written for a male student. And any gender-specific word just has to have an exclamation point behind it. Okay, so we've got his, he, and capitalization is important, so you must stick to the correct English sort of capitalization for these words. The only thing you need to do is add an exclamation point. You don't need to change them to red. I've just included that so it's a little bit clearer to see for this example. So the other things you'd notice here are we have unit. Okay, now this is quite optional because in my case we have much the same kind of reports for various units we do. So if I wanted to change this to the toolbox project unit, I could change that for my whole class and say we change the unit the next semester or next term to something else. I could just change that and the reports mostly still make sense. Okay, of course there'll probably be a few little edits I'll make, but generally that's the reason I've got it here. You don't have to do that. If you study multiple units per term, then you would probably just not use that and actually mention the units that you would have studied in that term. Of course, it kind of makes it more difficult to pinpoint exactly where the improvements and so on should be, but you may have to write it in a slightly more general way, but that's what it is. So to have that automatically change, it needs to be units with a capital U and then an exclamation point. So you can see I've just swapped mini speaker project to that little bit of code. This is kind of like mail merge. If you've ever used mail merge or similar systems, this is much the same thing. So next we've got he is a hard-working student, so on. These are all just gender-specific words. Now ATL skill, again, because we tend to do different ATL skills for different units and so on, it actually just picks the name from here. So whatever you type in here will jump into this area. So ATL exclamation point, that's where you want the name of the ATL skill. So this at the moment looks kind of weird because it's saying he's exceeding expectations in terms of his ATL skill, but that is just the name kind of label that goes right there. And then finally this term, as I've shown I think before, you can change the time period of the report, so you could use the system's right termly reports, and then at the end of the year you could just change this at the top to year, and it will change all your comments so that they talk about this year rather than this term. So to be able to do that, your sentences in this area must have term exclamation point instead of any mention of year, term, or anything time specific like that. And that's basically it. So to simplify, you must write it for a male student, you must have student exclamation point, all the gender specific words, including the difference in capitalized and non-capitalized. Just need to put an exclamation point at the end of them, and then there's these three, which are kind of optional, I guess, but it does make it much quicker and much more easy to use in the future if you do include these. So for example, if I wanted to change, let's change this one to something else. So if our students are exceeding expectations, let's just get rid of it completely, write something totally new. I'll write it out in sort of plain English first, and then I'll just show you my method of changing it. So he has exceeded of his ATL, his communication ATL skill this term through the so maybe this is the comment I actually want to use. He has exceeded expectations in terms of his communication ATL skill this term through the promising work he has submitted. What all I need to do here is, for any gender specific word, is add a exclamation point. So that's his, he has exceeded expectations in terms of his communication skill through promising work he has submitted. The only other thing I need to change is the fact that I want to be able to switch these ATL skills in the future. So I'm just going to type, instead of communication there, ATL exclamation point. Now, just remember what this one said. He has exceeded expectations through the promising work he has submitted, EE. So if we go on to this, I'll just change them all to EE. You can see how it changes it. So for Sarah has exceeded expectations in terms of her creative thinking ATL skill this term through the promising work she has submitted. So you can see there it's picked up on that she's a girl, so it's changed all those gender specific words, and it's entered this. So I'll just put test. I'll just put test in there in terms of her test ATL skill, and you get the idea. So it's actually automatically already there. You don't need to save anything. Of course, you'd want to save this sheet when you're working on it, when you're done with it. But as soon as you finish typing in here and you change that to whatever it was, it works. So that's, I mean, I could have edited any of these, but because of the random nature of most of this sheet, it would have been a bit harder for me to show you that so quickly. So this is basically how it works, how you can edit it as well. I'd love to know if you could genuinely make good use of this in your subject area. Please let me know of any things you wish it had, any other features I could maybe include to make it more useful to you. And otherwise, that is it for now. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.